Hello, it's Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Trulia. This will be a quick stream probably because I got a resting kid literally with me right now, but I wanted to do a response on Dr. Gavin Ortlund's video on the assumption of the Theotokos and make some comments on what I think the real spiritual issues here at work, not so much the historical, though I like talking about the historical. First things first, it's a good video, and it's overall a honest and accurate assessment of the best scholarship on the issue of the Assumption of Mary. I'm published in the field of Mariology, so I have a better background than most. I mean, better than everyone, of course, absolutely not. I'm the least of Marian scholars, but it's has a generally good grasp of what the majority of Marian scholars believe on the issue. I've already made some comments where I believe my own research has called to question that a particular document where the assumption is attested to is a later. I assert it's an earlier document, and we'll maybe talk about that later. But I think this is a bigger issue. It was an interesting video to me for two reasons. Let me start with number one, which is it is dynamite against the Orthodox if you really understand the issues at work. Why? Because Orthodox epistemology demands that consensus, the Vincentian canon, what was believed everywhere, always, by all, that's what determines whether it's a correct doctrine, whether it's dogmatic and people should accept it. And historically speaking, I think that Dr. Ortlund is accurate, meaning if you're going to take the professional field of history, we're not talking spiritual yet, but the professional field of history, he's fundamentally accurate in saying, well, what we have here is a doctrine that doesn't have this sort of early consensus, or at least doesn't appear to, according to most mainstream scholars. And so this calls into question why this could be dogmatic. Now, against Roman Catholics is really kind of irrelevant because they believe in doctrinal development. So they don't even need the doctrine to exist. So even though I think the vitriol of the video was against Roman Catholics more specifically, really is kind of irrelevant to them. But to us Orthodox who actually believe we have an historical apostolic faith, I mean, that's quite damaging if you understand the issues at work. Because we have a doctrine, the Dormition and Assumption of the Theotokos, and what we don't have is a consensus of saints in the first, second, third centuries, which generally people want to see. They want to see pre-Nicene. I don't know why that's the magical number. And so I could show in the historical evidence, bona fide evidence for icons, bona fide evidence for prayers to angels and to the saints, bona fide evidence for the Eucharist, for this Eucharistic sacrifice, every important Orthodox doctrine, which Protestants all reject, no salvation outside the church. All these things will be found in consensus of saints. But when it comes to the Assumption of Mary, we just don't have the excellent historical evidence that early. That's just the reality. We have, I would say, it would be a gross simplification to say that there's no evidence. I would disagree with Dr. Schumacher that the Pseudo-John, which is the name of the earliest Greek Dormition homily, came after a Gnostic Ethiopic and Syriac, by the way, Dormition homily. I would assert that the Greek original, being that it's the most simplistic and everything else adds things to this document, would make sense that the Greek is earliest, especially because there's details in the translation, the Ethiopic, for example, the Gaz, that indicate that it was originally coming from a Greek source. They're called the palm leaf narratives, if people are terribly interested. And so that being said, that means if we're dating the Ethiopic document to the 4th century, and the Greek, and by the way, that's Schumacher makes that assertion in his latest scholarship in his 2016 book on page 25. If that's from approximately 100 years before the Council of Ephesus, as Schumacher says, but the Greek comes before it, we may have a Greek Dormition homily I date to the 4th century, conservatively, but it really might be the 3rd century. All right. And so then when we get these later comments from, let's say, St. Epiphanius, where it's even though he denies there's one single tradition on the Theotokos, what happened to her body, but when he gives his own opinion, it seems to imply that he says she is like Elijah, that she's a virgin and that she was assumed into heaven. So this seems to me at least to be the most popular narrative. The answer is why? Because there's archaeological evidence. Now, this is what problem with apologetics. It's inconvenient with archaeological evidence. There are 2 tombs, the Theotokos in the 4th century. One was in Jerusalem, and which I believe Epiphanius would have had good firsthand knowledge of, and the other was in Ephesus. Now, obviously, being that all the Christian communions today that are apostolic accept the tomb in Jerusalem area, the one in Ephesus is considered a false tomb. But what they have in common that people in the 4th century have been aware of? No relics. They were empty tombs. And, Mary and a lot of these other saints, they were not like Egyptian pharaohs where you could raid their tombs and get gold and stuff. So, like, raiding their tomb would make no sense. The one in Jerusalem is attested to in the 5th century, so it's very likely at least a 4th century archaeological site. And we would argue from the 1st century because we believe it's really Mary's tomb. It's got interesting details which wouldn't seem made up, like the space for the Theotokos body is only 4.5 feet long, which shows that she was very short. Like usually, like, they wouldn't want to do something that would show like the Satan's kind of lesser. And so I think we have good evidence archaeologically that the Theotokos has a real tomb. It's in Jerusalem or the vicinity there, and that it's empty. So, of course, people would say, well, the body disappeared. What happened to the body? And what do we know from Jewish tradition? Well, assumption. Missing bodies like Moses, the Jews would teach, well, they were assumed. And so I think historically speaking, the most popular belief, at least by the 4th century, would have been that the Theotokos was assumed. But there seems to be a lack of canonical, and canonical would be considered a rule of a hagiography, which would say this is definitely what occurred. Because what we have now are these canonical understandings of what happened to the Theotokos when she died. And this comes from saints beginning really in the 6th century, writing these narratives. Well, actually, not even Orthodox, that might be Miaphysites, to be honest. I'd have to look at my own article again. So the point is, we have historical evidence of popular Christian belief in the 4th century and 5th century, where it was pretty much universal because everyone takes for granted they all knew the tombs are empty. They all know this is a popular idea. We have these homilies agreeing on these details. But there'd be good reason for historians to quibble. And the reason why historians would quibble is because, well, if a homily doesn't mention the assumption, then this shows they weren't aware of the idea. And that might be too reductionist, but it also, you don't want to infer things where the evidence isn't there. So that's why I would say that Dr. Ortlund gave a good historical synopsis of what scholars believe, and scholars have good reason for those conclusions, and so I respect those conclusions. A few of the details I just brought up would call into question some of those historical conclusions in my own article. If you read footnote 30, it actually refers to it, and in my community page, I have the extended version of the footnote for those who want the citations and all the details. So anyway, that being said, this is a dry historical topic. Why do Protestants care? Why would Mary being assumed be something that would make someone vitriolic? They would actually get angry and disgusted. You could almost see like this look of disgust and sound of disgust talking about it. Well, for a moment, first let's take Dr. Ortlund at his word, because I think at his word, this is a good argument. He says, well, if we're not historically sure this was a doctrine of the apostles, then why is this dogma? Why are we going to force people to believe this if we can't historically delineate it's actually apostolic? Okay, I mean, that's a good argument. And you know what? I'll let him make that point. All right? Because like I said, what I just gave was something like, well, we got good historical evidence, but again, it's like inferred from the evidence. So I'm going to say if someone were to disagree with my interpretation, I respect it. However, do you think that is really the reason, if we're going to go to the subconscious of most of the viewers, watching that video behind the vitriol in a video like that, and in similar Protestant apologetics? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. And I think it's because the assumption itself is not an offensive doctrine, right? If a body is assumed, I mean, Moses' body was assumed. There's assumption of Moses referred to in the Epistle of Jude. Elijah and Enoch were assumed. It's not really offensive, twice, by the way, in the scriptures. It's not very offensive to believe a saint was assumed. Why is this? It doesn't make someone a god or anything like that. So why would just saying, I believe that Theotokos was assumed, and this is a point of doctrine you must accept, it's just like the 66 book scriptures. Like, you can't go to a Protestant church and say, I believe the wisdom of Solomon's a scripture, or I believe Esther is not a scripture. They'll go, no, this is the word of God. You must accept this. Well, that's their tradition. And it's a respectable tradition, just like the assumption's a respectable tradition for us. And we make both those dogmas. They make their 66 book canon dogma. We make the assumption dogma. So I don't think either would be a deal breaker for a normal person where they'd get vitriolic over it. They could historically quibble, but like, all right, that's a dogma for them, and it's a respectable dogma. And I could go with that. And someone saying monophysites, yes, I just like to call people by how they call themselves. So that's why I use the term neophysite. So that being said, then why get so angry about the assumption? And maybe anger's a word, but why be vitriolic? Why just have so much negativity around this? And here's why. Here's the spiritual reason that apologists don't talk about. It's because the things of God are a scandal to the world. The crucifixion of Christ, the fact that God became man, right? Though existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. So he took the form of a servant. That's a scandal to the world. The crucifixion and death is a scandal to the world. The resurrection of the body was a scandal to the world. The things of God are always scandals in the world. Take, for example, where the Christian religion arose from. It arose from the Middle East. The most honor-bound, honor-killing, pride-based societies that exist. And what's Christ teach these people? He teaches these people, turn the other cheek. Who would believe a religion where we turn the other cheek in an honor-bound society? Well, no one, because the things of God are always a scandal of the world. Christ says, look upon a woman with lust is adultery. All right? Now, what person trying to make a large religion is going to teach that? Because almost no man really does that. A few Christian men actually do, as they should. But almost nobody does that. And to say women have their own version, they got romance novels and stuff. So that's a scandal to the world. Because the things of God are a scandal to the world. That's what attracted me to Christianity when I realized it. When I first read the scriptures, I go, no one would ever write this unless it was God behind it. No one would ever believe this unless it were of God. So now let's take this with the saints and with Mary. People outside the church don't accept the things of the Theotokos or the saints because the things of God are always a scandal to those outside the church. It's always been that. It'll always be that. And so if you see people being scandalized by something so minor, really minor as historical detail, as the assumption, all right? Now, if that is the case, then this shows that the scandal of the cross is at work. Because the cross is not just the death of the saint or the following Christ because he died. It's the resurrection. Either their soul and their weight in their bodies, or in Mary's case, with her body. This is a scandal because the cross has always been a scandal to people. And I would be seriously concerned if I were a Protestant, if I were that scandalized. I have to admit, when I was a Protestant years ago, I actually wasn't scandalized by these things when I came to grips with pretty much all early Christians believed these things. And I realized, well, then this can't be a deal breaker for me because it wasn't as scandalous to pretty much the consensus of Christians, right? Like even an Anglican historian, he found that, yeah, prayer to saints, this was a consensus in the early church. So obviously these things shouldn't scandalize us, but if they scandalize you deep down, that shows you you're divorced from the cross. And that is scary. That's something people should be mindful of. there's another point I'd like to make about this. And because this is an impromptu video, I can't think of it at the moment. Hopefully come out. But I do want to make a comment here. It says the saints repeatedly say monophysites, and that's why I'm not going to disagree with it when it says monophysite. I'm saying why I will use the term meophysite. I use both in my article, the term monophysite's in it, by the way. So we need to respect both, all right? So show respect the term monophysite, and respect the term meophysite. Okay, that's my view. Saith me, not the Lord. Now, putting aside the fact that the things of God are always a scandal to people in the world, there's the issue that when it comes to these Marian doctrines, the perpetual virginity, we have first, second century sources. Praise the Theotokos, second and third century sources, and plus more after that, of course. All the truly divisive doctrines, they're all established. So if you go, well, I disagree with the historicity of her body being assumed, this something that actually shouldn't be scandalous. This shows to me, again, something bigger at work. So I want to challenge Protestants when it comes to this. You've heard in the beginning this historical defense that there's an historically plausible way to infer that the assumption is a apostolic doctrine. At the very least, it's a respectable doctrine, shouldn't be a deal breaker for people. I want to challenge them spiritually to ask themselves, why are they scandalized by this? Because I think this reveals actual schism, an actual divorce of charity. Because this wasn't a scandal to Christians. If you say, well, these things became clear and grew in popularity over time, and then you think, well, then it's a development, it's not authentic. Why didn't it scandalize those people? Why didn't it scandalize the people of God? Ultimately speaking, all Protestantism hinges upon this view that there's pretty much a great apostasy. And I think it becomes indefensible to say the whole Christian church they dropped the ball at some point. Because again, this doctrine and other Marian doctrines, they haven't scandalized anyone. So I might follow up with more points on this issue, but those are pretty much my comments for now, because I want to keep this brief. If this has blessed you, I want to invite people to go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. The churches are in desperate need of donations right now. We're using up the special collections that a few parishes have put together, and that means it's you, the audience. You're it to keep Orthodoxy alive in Cambodia. So please, please, please go to orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. Donate to the churches in Cambodia. Pray for the churches there, especially your newly illumined John. You go to seminary, so we could be making converts. He's a Khmer convert that are making clergy. I'm praying for Father Roman, Father Paisy. Father Paisy will be doing a Q&A session. So you'll have a chance to speak to a bona fide Moldovan monk. He's a priest, the rector of the Church of St. George in Phnom Penh. We'll be having a question and answer session in July. And tonight, there will be me and Trent Horn presenting Why We're Not Protestant. So please tune in tonight to watch me and Trent Horn present that topic. And that's it. Again, it's been a lot of fun to talk about this and talk about the scandal of the cross and why we should be concerned if we're scandalized by the things of God. So that being said, I'll end this show as I end all of them by saying, fight to the death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you. God bless you. Have a great day.